Sometimes the hardest choice we face is whether to help someone we're supposed to hate. Sometimes mercy asks more courage than revenge ever could. In the Arizona Territory, a cowboy named Jacob Stone hangs from a cottonwood tree, left to die by outlaws under the desert sun. His hands are bound, his strength means nothing now, and hope is fading fast. Then an Apache woman named Nalin finds him while gathering herbs in the canyon. Her people and his have been enemies for generations. Every reason tells her to walk away and let fate take its course. But something in his eyes reaches across all that history and hatred, speaking to something deeper in her heart. What will she choose when mercy and survival stand against each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days earlier, the sun rose over the Apache village with the same golden promise it had offered for countless generations. Nalin stood outside her dwelling, a simple structure of timber and hide that had sheltered her family for more years than she could count. The morning air carried the scent of sage and juniper, mixed with the smoke from cooking fires that dotted the camp. She breathed it in deeply, letting the familiar smells center her spirit before the day's work began. At 28 winters, Nalin had earned her place as the village's medicine woman, a role passed down from her grandmother, who now moved slowly but still commanded great respect among their people. The worn leather pouch that hung at Nalin's side had belonged to her grandmother first, and to her great-grandmother before that. Inside, carefully wrapped bundles of herbs represented years of accumulated knowledge. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, sage for purification, and dozens more. Each plant had its purpose, each remedy its proper application. Her grandmother had taught her that healing was not merely about treating wounds, but about understanding the whole person, seeing past the injury to the spirit beneath. Nalin's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked her supplies. Today, she would venture into the canyon lands to gather fresh herbs. The late summer season offered the best time for harvesting, when the plants held their strongest medicine. She had learned to read the land the way others read tracks, knowing where each plant preferred to grow, which faced the morning sun and which sought the shade of afternoon. "You go far today, sister?" The voice belonged to her younger brother, Kuruk, who approached with the easy stride of a warrior in his prime. At 23, he had already proven himself in several skirmishes with settlers and the soldiers who protected them. His face bore the set jaw and hard eyes of someone who had seen too much conflict, too much loss. "Only to the Red Canyon," Nalin replied, not meeting his gaze. She knew what he would say, the same warning he offered every time she left the village boundaries. "The settlers push closer each season. Their cattle drink from our springs. Their fences cross our hunting grounds." Kuruk's voice carried an edge that had grown sharper over the past year. "It is not safe for you to wander alone. I have walked these lands since I was a child," Nalin said quietly. "The earth knows my footsteps. The spirits watch over those who respect the old ways." Kuruk shook his head, frustration evident in the tight set of his shoulders. "The spirits did not protect our cousins when the settlers came to their village. The spirits did not stop the soldiers who drove the mescalero from their ancestral lands." Nalin finally looked at her brother, seeing not the warrior, but the boy who had once followed her through the hills, laughing as they chased rabbits and climbed trees. That boy had disappeared somewhere in the years of struggle, replaced by this hard man who saw enemies in every shadow. "Hatred is easy, brother," she said softly. "It asks nothing of us but to close our hearts. Grandmother taught me differently." Before Kuruk could respond, their grandmother emerged from her dwelling, moving with the careful deliberation of her 80-some years. Despite her age, her eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. She had led their family through the worst of the conflicts, had buried a husband, 2 sons, and 3 grandchildren to the violence that seemed to have no end. "Let her go." "Kuruk," the old woman said, her voice still strong despite the years. "Nalin walks her own path as she must." Kuruk opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. No one argued with their grandmother, not when she used that particular tone. He turned and strode away, his displeasure evident in every step. The old woman approached Nalin, reaching out to touch her granddaughter's cheek with a weathered hand. "You carry a heavy burden, little one. I see it in your eyes, in the way you watch the horizon. I don't understand what you mean, grandmother." "You will," the old woman said with a knowing smile. "The spirits show me things in my dreams. They tell me change is coming, that the old hatreds must give way to something new. But change demands courage, and courage demands sacrifice." Nalin felt a chill despite the warming day. Her grandmother's visions had never been wrong, though their meaning often remained obscure until events unfolded. "What have you seen?" "I have seen you standing between two worlds, holding them together when they would tear apart. I have seen you make a choice that will cost you much, but save even more." The old woman squeezed Nalin's hand. "Trust your heart, child. It knows wisdom that your mind has not yet learned." With those cryptic words, her grandmother turned and moved back toward her dwelling, leaving Nalin standing in the morning light with more questions than answers. She adjusted the medicine pouch at her side, checked that her water skin was full, and set out toward the canyon lands. The walk took her through terrain she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. She passed the old trading post, long abandoned now, where as a girl she had sometimes seen settlers come to barter for furs and hides. Those had been different times, before the tensions grew so fierce, before every meeting between their peoples seemed to end in bloodshed. She remembered one settler family in particular, a man with kind eyes who had given her a piece of hard candy once. He had spoken slowly, using hand signs to communicate, and had shown her a small painting of his own children back east. She wondered what had happened to him, whether he had survived the intervening years of conflict or become another casualty of the endless cycle of revenge. The path descended into the Red Canyon, named for the iron-rich stone that glowed like fire in the afternoon sun. Here the air grew cooler, and the sound of her footsteps echoed off the ancient walls. This was sacred ground, a place where her people had performed ceremonies for generations. She felt the weight of that history in every breath, the presence of ancestors who had walked this same path. As she moved deeper into the canyon, Nalin began her search for the specific herbs she needed. She found wild tobacco growing in a shaded crevice, its leaves perfect for ceremonial use. Further along, she discovered a patch of osha root, invaluable for treating respiratory ailments. Each plant she harvested with a whispered prayer of thanks, taking only what was needed and leaving the rest to propagate. The morning passed in this meditative work, her mind quiet, her movements deliberate. This was when she felt most at peace, alone in the wild places where the complications of human conflict seemed distant and small. Here there were no settlers or Apache, no soldiers or warriors, only the eternal dance of life that had played out in this desert long before her people arrived and would continue long after they were gone. It was approaching midday when Nalin heard the distant sound of horses. She froze, listening intently. The sound came from the direction of the main trail, echoing off the canyon walls in a way that made it difficult to judge distance. Settlers, most likely, or perhaps soldiers on patrol. Either way, they represented danger. She moved silently toward a rocky outcropping that would provide both cover and a vantage point. From there, she could see a stretch of the trail without being seen herself. Years of practice had taught her how to move without sound, how to become part of the landscape. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. 3 riders, hard-looking men with the dusty, weathered appearance of those who lived on the wrong side of the law. They led a 4th horse, and on that horse sat a man with his hands bound, his head down, clearly a prisoner. Even from this distance, she could see he was a large man, broad-shouldered and tall. The men around him laughed and joked, passing a bottle between them, while their prisoner swayed in the saddle, barely holding himself upright. Nalin should have turned away then. This was not her concern, not her people's business. Whatever trouble this settler had found himself in was the natural consequence of the lawless frontier, where violence begat violence in an endless spiral. Her brother's warnings echoed in her mind, along with memories of all the reasons her people had to hate these invaders. But something held her there, watching. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps something deeper that she did not yet understand. The riders moved out of sight, heading toward the deeper canyon where the old cottonwood tree stood alone, a landmark visible for miles. Nalin remained hidden for long minutes after they passed, wrestling with herself. She should return to her gathering, should forget what she had seen. Instead, she found her feet carrying her along a parallel path, one that would bring her to the cottonwood from a different direction. Staying out of sight, she told herself it was simple caution, that she needed to know if these men planned to camp in the area. But even then, some part of her knew she was lying to herself. Some instinct, some pull she could not name, drew her forward toward whatever fate awaited at that old tree. The sun climbed higher as she moved through the canyon, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Nalin's water skin grew lighter with each sip, but she pressed on, driven by a compulsion she could not explain and did not want to examine too closely. She would reach the cottonwood within the hour. Whatever she found there would change everything, though she did not know it yet. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind like a prophecy waiting to unfold. Trust your heart, child. It knows wisdom that your mind has not yet learned. Nalin adjusted the medicine pouch at her side and continued forward, walking toward a destiny that would demand everything she had ever believed about mercy, justice, and the courage to choose between them. The cottonwood tree stood ancient and solitary, its thick trunk scarred by countless seasons, and its branches spreading wide enough to offer shade to a dozen men. Nalin approached from the high ground, moving with the silence her people had perfected over generations of survival. Below, in the clearing around the tree, the three riders had dismounted and were forcing their prisoner to stand. From her hidden vantage point behind a tumble of red boulders, Nalin could see them clearly now. The prisoner was indeed a giant of a man, easily a head taller than his captors, and built with the solid strength of someone who had spent his life doing hard physical work. His face bore the evidence of a recent beating, one eye swollen nearly shut, his lips split and bleeding. His shirt was torn and stained with blood and dust. Yet despite his injuries and bound hands, he held himself with a dignity that surprised her. The three outlaws circled him like wolves around wounded prey. The leader was easy to identify, a man of perhaps 40 years, with a cruel face and cold eyes that held no trace of mercy. He wore a black hat with a rattlesnake band and had a pearl-handled revolver on each hip. Everything about him spoke of violence and the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of getting away with it. "Well, Stone," the leader said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air, "I'll give you one last chance to see reason. Sign over that land deed. Tell us where you hid the survey maps, and we'll make this quick. Painless even." The big man, Stone apparently, lifted his head. When he spoke, his voice was rough but steady, carrying the kind of quiet strength that did not need volume to command attention. "I already told you, Carver. That land was legally purchased. The deed is filed with the territorial office. And I don't have any survey maps because I'm not involved in whatever scheme you're running." The outlaw called Carver laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You see, that's what I admire about you, Stone. Even now, even knowing you're about to die, you stick to your principles." He spat in the dust. "Principles don't mean nothing out here. This territory belongs to men strong enough to take it." "Strength and brutality aren't the same thing," Stone replied. "Though I don't expect you to understand the difference." Carver's face darkened with rage. He moved forward and struck Stone across the face with the back of his hand, the sound of the blow echoing off the canyon walls. Stone's head snapped to the side, but he didn't fall, didn't cry out. He simply straightened again and met Carver's eyes with a steady gaze that seemed to infuriate the outlaw even more. "You always did think you were better than everyone else," Carver snarled. "Coming out here with your fancy education, your books, your talk about fair treatment for the Indians. You think that makes you noble. It makes you a fool." He turned to his men. "String him up." Nalin's breath caught in her throat as she watched them throw a rope over the lowest, thick branch of the cottonwood. This was not going to be a quick hanging, she realized, with growing horror. They meant to make him suffer, to leave him suspended just high enough that his toes could barely touch the ground, letting him slowly strangle over hours or even days. The two other outlaws forced Stone to stand beneath the branch while Carver fashioned a noose. Despite his size and obvious strength, Stone could do nothing with his hands bound. They pulled the noose tight around his neck, then hauled on the rope until he was forced onto his toes, gasping for air. "Here's what's going to happen," Carver said, tying off the rope around the trunk. "We're going to leave you here in Apache territory. When they find you, and they will find you, they'll think the settlers sent another scout into their lands. Maybe they'll take credit for killing you, maybe they won't. Either way, it'll be one more reason for the tribes and the settlers to go at each other's throats." Stone's face was already turning red from the constriction, but he managed to force out words. "You want a war. You want chaos so you can steal land while everyone's fighting." "Smart man," Carver said with an ugly grin. "Too smart for your own good. See, there's money to be made when people are desperate and scared. Land goes cheap when folks are running for their lives. And with you gone, there's no one left who knows what I've been doing." He leaned closer. "That sheriff who was asking questions about missing cattle? He had an unfortunate accident last month. Fell off his horse, broke his neck. Real tragic." A chill ran through Nalin at those words. She had heard about the sheriff's death, had heard the whispers that it was not the accident it appeared to be. Now she was hearing a confession to murder and understanding that this man Carver was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Carver stepped back, admiring his handiwork. Stone hung suspended, his toes barely scraping the ground, his face darkening as he struggled for air. "I'd say it's been a pleasure, but we both know that'd be a lie. Boys, let's ride. We've got business in town." The three outlaws mounted their horses, laughing and passing the bottle again as they rode off. Their laughter faded into the distance, swallowed by the vastness of the desert, leaving only the terrible silence broken by Stone's labored, strangled breathing. Nalin remained hidden, frozen by indecision and a tumult of conflicting emotions. She should leave, should return to her village and forget she had ever witnessed this. This man was a settler, one of the people who had brought so much suffering to her tribe. Her brother's words echoed in her mind, along with memories of raids and reprisals, of friends and family lost to the endless conflict, but her grandmother's voice was there too, speaking of mercy and the courage to see beyond hatred. And there was something else, something in the way this man had stood up to his tormentors, refusing to compromise his principles even in the face of death. Something in the words Carver had spoken, talk of fair treatment for the Indians, of standing against theft and violence. She watched him struggle, watched him fight for each breath. His strength was evident even now, the muscles in his legs straining to maintain that precarious contact with the ground, buying himself precious minutes of life. But she could see he was weakening, see that without intervention he would be dead before sunset. Nalin's hands moved to the medicine pouch at her side, her fingers tracing its familiar contours, as if seeking guidance from the generations of healers who had carried it before her. Her grandmother had taught her that a healer's duty transcended tribal boundaries, that suffering was suffering, regardless of who endured it. But this was different. This was not simply treating a wound, but actively choosing to save someone her people considered an enemy. A crumpled piece of paper caught her eye, partially visible in Stone's shirt pocket. Moving with careful silence, she descended from her hiding place, circling wide to approach from behind the tree where she would be hidden from the trail. Her heart hammered in her chest, part fear and part something else she could not name. As she drew closer, she could hear his labored breathing more clearly, could see the tremor in his legs as they fought to maintain their position. She moved around to where she could see his face, staying just out of his peripheral vision, and studied him more carefully. His features, even swollen and bloodied, showed a kind of fundamental decency. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and squinting into sun, not the hard creases of cruelty. His hands, though bound, were calloused from honest work, not the soft hands of someone who made others do his labor. And then his eyes opened, or rather, his one good eye, the other still swollen shut. He saw her standing there, and their gazes locked. In that moment, Nalin felt something shift in her chest, some fundamental understanding that passed between them without words. He did not beg, did not plead or make promises. He simply looked at her with an expression of profound acceptance, as if acknowledging her right to choose, her right to walk away and leave him to his fate. There was pain in his eyes, yes, but also a strange kind of peace, as if he had already made his accounting with whatever gods he believed in. That acceptance, that recognition of her autonomy in this moment, moved her more than any plea could have. Here was a man who, even facing death, even seeing potential salvation before him, would not demean himself or her by begging. He would let her make her choice freely, without the burden of his desperation. Nalin took a step closer, then another. She reached into his pocket and withdrew the crumpled paper, smoothing it out to read. It was a wanted poster, but the description did not match the man before her. The poster claimed Jacob Stone was wanted for crimes against Apache settlements, raids, theft, murder. But the dates listed coincided with times when, if Carver's words were true, Stone had been advocating for peace and fair treatment. Lies, she whispered, and his eye found hers again. A flash of gratitude in his gaze for being understood. She made her decision then, in that moment of connection. Her hands went to the knife at her belt, a good blade that had belonged to her father. She moved behind him, stretching up on her own toes to reach the rope where it wrapped around the branch. The rope was thick and new, difficult to cut, but she sawed at it with determined strokes. Stone's legs gave out once, and she heard the terrible choking sound he made before he found purchase again. She worked faster, her own breathing rapid now, her mind racing with the implications of what she was doing. The rope parted suddenly and Stone fell, landing hard on his knees, gasping and coughing as air flooded back into his lungs. The sound was awful, wet and painful, but it was the sound of life. He remained on his hands and knees, the noose still around his neck, his whole body shaking with the effort of breathing. Nalin heard horses then, distant but growing louder. The outlaws were returning or others were coming. They had no time. She grabbed Stone's arm, pulling at him with surprising strength for her size. "Get up," she hissed in his language. "Now, move." He staggered to his feet, still bound, still weak, but moving. She guided him away from the tree, toward the rocks where she had been hiding. There was a cave there, one she knew from her years exploring these canyons. It was sacred ground, forbidden to outsiders, but she pushed that thought aside. Sacred ground or not, it would hide them. They made it into the sheltering rocks, just as the riders came into view. Nalin pulled Stone deeper into the shadows, into the narrow opening that led to the cave beyond. He was too large to move easily through the tight space, and she heard him grunt in pain as Stone scraped against his injuries. But he kept moving, kept following her lead. The cave opened into a larger chamber, cool and dark. A shaft in the rock above allowed sunlight to filter down, illuminating ancient paintings on the walls, handprints and symbols left by her ancestors countless generations ago. Stone collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, the noose still cutting into his throat. Nalin knelt beside him and carefully loosened the noose, pulling it free. His neck was raw and bleeding, where the rope had cut into flesh. She reached for her medicine pouch, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, even as her mind reeled with what she had just done. Outside, she could hear the outlaws' voices, confused and angry at finding their victim gone. They would search, but they would not find this place. Few knew of its existence, and fewer still knew the entrance. She looked down at the man she had saved, this Jacob Stone, who was already beginning to represent something she did not yet understand. His good eye opened again, finding her face in the dim light. "Thank you," he managed to whisper, his voice destroyed by the strangulation. "Why?" Nalin did not answer because she did not yet know the answer herself. She had violated her tribe's trust, had saved a settler's life, had brought him to sacred ground. She had made a choice that could never be unmade, that would ripple forward into consequences she could not predict. All she knew was that in that moment, when their eyes had met, she had seen not an enemy, but a human soul. And her grandmother's teachings about the universality of suffering, about mercy being the highest form of courage, had proven stronger than years of learned hatred. She began treating his wounds in silence, and outside the cave, the outlaws continued their fruitless search. The sun moved across the sky, marking the passage of time, and the beginning of a journey neither of them had chosen, but both would have to walk together. The first hours in the cave passed in tense silence, broken only by the sounds of Nalin's ministrations and Jacob's labored breathing. She worked with the focused efficiency of her training, cleaning wounds with water from her skin and applying poultices made from the herbs in her medicine pouch. The swelling around his eye would take days to subside, and the rope burns on his neck would leave scars. But he would live. Jacob watched her work through his one good eye, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She was not used to being observed so closely, especially not by a settler. His gaze held no hostility, only a kind of wondering gratitude, mixed with what looked like confusion. "You speak English," he said finally, his voice still rough and painful. It was not a question but an observation. "Some," Nalin replied, keeping her eyes on her work. In truth, she spoke it better than she let on. The old trading post had taught her much, and her grandmother had insisted she learn, saying that understanding the enemy's language was a form of power. "Your people," Jacob continued slowly, clearly fighting through pain to form the words. "They have every reason to hate mine, to leave me hanging there, to finish what Carver started." He paused, wincing as she applied a stinging paste to the cuts on his face. "Why didn't you?" Nalin's hands stilled for a moment. It was a question she had been asking herself, one she still did not have a complete answer for. "My grandmother teaches that healing is not about choosing who deserves help. It is about recognizing suffering and having the courage to ease it." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Nalin began wrapping his neck with strips of clean cloth she kept in her medicine pouch for this purpose. "She sees things others do not. Dreams of what will be." Jacob's eye widened slightly. "A seer? Some call it that." "She calls it listening to the spirits who have walked before us." Nalin tied off the bandage and sat back, finally meeting his gaze fully. "She told me this morning that I would stand between two worlds, that I would make a choice that would cost much but save more. And is this that choice?" "I do not know yet." She reached for his bound hands, examining the rope that cut into his wrists. "How long has that been on?" "Since yesterday morning. They took me from my homestead before dawn." He watched as she carefully cut the rope away, his expression tightening as blood rushed back into his hands. The pain must have been considerable, but he made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. Nalin began massaging his wrists gently, working feeling back into the damaged tissue. "The man called Carver. He said you spoke about fair treatment for my people." "I did. I do." Jacob flexed his fingers slowly, testing them. "I came west 5 years ago, after my wife and daughter died of fever back in Missouri. Thought I'd find peace in the open spaces, start fresh. But what I found was chaos and cruelty on both sides. Settlers taking land that wasn't theirs, Indians raiding settlements in retaliation, everyone claiming righteousness while committing atrocities." He paused, and Nalin saw deep pain flicker across his face. Not physical pain, but something older, deeper. "I tried to be different, tried to be fair. I learned some of your language, your customs. When settlers wanted to graze cattle on traditional hunting grounds, I helped negotiate agreements. When there were disputes over water rights, I worked to find solutions that honored both sides. And this made you enemies," Nalin said quietly. "It made me enemies on both sides," Jacob corrected with a bitter smile. "The settlers thought I was an Indian lover. Your people thought I was a spy or a fool. Carver and his men saw me as an obstacle to their plans." He touched his neck gingerly, wincing. "Turns out they were right to see me as a threat. I documented their crimes, their false land claims, their murders. I was planning to take evidence to the territorial governor, Nalin processed this information, trying to reconcile it with everything she had been taught about settlers. They were supposed to be uniformly cruel, driven only by greed and conquest. But here was a man who had tried to build bridges, who had suffered for attempting to do right. The world suddenly seemed more complicated than the clear lines of enmity she had always known. "The canteen at your belt," she said, noticing it for the first time. It was nearly empty, had been hanging there all through his ordeal. Why did they not take it? Why leave you any water at all? Jacob's expression grew darker. Cruelty. Carver wanted me to have just enough hope, just enough moisture, to keep me alive longer while I strangled. He's that kind of man. The suffering is the point, not just the death. The words sent a chill through Nalin. She had encountered cruelty before, had seen violence and hatred in many forms. But there was something particularly cold-blooded about the calculated torture Jacob described. It spoke to a depth of evil that transcended the understandable hatreds of war. She unstoppered his canteen and held it to his lips. He drank slowly, carefully, his throat too damaged for anything more. When he finished, she gave him some of her own water as well. They would need to ration it, but right now he needed it more. "You cannot go back to your homestead," Nalin said. "Carver will have men watching, waiting to see if you somehow survived." "I know." Jacob leaned his head back against the cave wall, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I have nowhere to go. Can't go to town. Carver has influence there, friends in positions of power. Can't go to the territorial office without evidence, and all my documents are at the homestead. Then you will stay here until you are strong enough to travel. After that—" She stopped, not wanting to think about what came after. Her mind was already racing with the implications of what she had done. Every hour he remained in her care was another hour she was betraying her people's trust, another hour of compounding her choice. "After that, you'll have done more than enough," Jacob said quietly. "You've already saved my life. I can't ask you to risk more than that." But Nalin barely heard him. She was thinking about her brother Kuruk, who would be expecting her back by nightfall. About her grandmother, whose wisdom had led her to this moment, but who could not protect her from the consequences. About the village, and the complex web of obligations and loyalties that bound her to her people. A sound from outside the cave made them both freeze. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, moving through the rocks. Nalin's hand went to her knife, and Jacob tensed despite his injuries. They waited in the dim light, barely breathing as the footsteps came closer. Then a voice called out in Apache, young and male. "Nalin, sister, are you here?" Guruk, her brother, had come looking for her. Of all the complications that could have arisen, this was perhaps the worst. Kuruk would kill Jacob without hesitation if he found him here. Her brother's hatred of settlers ran deep, fed by personal losses and years of conflict. Jacob understood the danger too. She could see it in his face, the way his body tensed for a fight despite his weakened state. His hands moved to the discarded rope, as if he might use it as a weapon if needed. But she put her hand on his arm, stopping him, shaking her head firmly. "Stay silent," she whispered in English, her voice barely audible. "Do not move. Do not breathe loud." She stood and moved to the cave entrance, positioning herself to block any view of the interior. Taking a breath to steady herself, she called back in Apache, "I am here, brother. I am safe." Kuruk appeared in the narrow opening, his warrior's instincts immediately suspicious. "Why are you in the sacred cave? You know it is forbidden to shelter here without the elders' permission." "I needed to rest," Nalin said, hoping her voice sounded casual. The heat was too much, and this place was closest. Her brother's eyes narrowed. He was not stupid, and she was not a good liar. There are closer places to rest. Places that are not sacred, not forbidden. He tried to look past her into the cave. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing," Nalin said, perhaps too quickly. "I am hiding nothing. I simply came here to think, to pray. Grandmother's words this morning troubled me. Grandmother's words always trouble you," Kuruk said, but his suspicion had not eased. "She fills your head with ideas about peace and mercy that will get you killed." He took a step closer. "Let me pass, sister. I would see the cave interior." Nalin's mind raced. If she refused, Kuruk would know she was hiding something and would force his way past. If she allowed him entry, he would find Jacob and likely kill him before she could intervene. Her hand moved subtly toward the knife at her belt, and the thought that flashed through her mind horrified her. Could she actually fight her own brother to protect a settler? But then Jacob's voice came from behind her, speaking in careful, measured Apache with an accent, but clearly enough to be understood. "Peace, warrior. I'm unarmed and injured. I ask for sanctuary under the old laws." The effect was instant. Kuruk's hand went to his own knife, and he pushed past Nalin into the cave, his eyes adjusting to the dim light until he saw Jacob sitting against the wall. Clearly wounded, clearly defenseless. "A settler," Kuruk hissed, his voice full of venom. "You brought a settler to sacred ground." He turned to Nalin, his face a mask of betrayal and fury. "Have you lost your mind, sister? Do you know what the elders will do when they learn of this?" "He was dying," Nalin said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Dying at the hands of his own people. You could not let an enemy die." Kuruk's laugh was bitter. "How many of our people have died at settler hands? How many homes burned? How many children orphaned? And you save one of them?" "He is not like the others," Nalin insisted. "He tried to make peace, tried to help our people. That is why his own kind tried to kill him." "Pretty words," Kuruk spat. "Words all settlers speak when they want something from us. Words that mean nothing when their soldiers come with guns and fire." Jacob spoke again, his damaged voice carrying surprising strength. "Your sister speaks truth. I have documentation of crimes committed against your people. I was taking evidence to authorities when I was captured. The man who tried to kill me wants war between our peoples, so he can profit from the chaos." "More words," Kuruk said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now. "Not just words," Jacob continued. "Names, dates, locations. Proof of murder, theft, false land claims. Proof that could bring justice if it reaches the right authorities. Your sister saved not just a life, but perhaps a chance for truth to be heard." Nalin watched her brother struggle with this information, saw the conflict between his desire for revenge and his sense of honor. Kuruk was many things, but he was not a fool. He understood the value of evidence, of truth that could be wielded like a weapon. Finally he spoke again, his voice cold and measured. "I will not kill you, settler. Not because of my sister's foolish mercy, but because if what you say is true, you may be of use." He pointed his knife at Jacob. "But know this, if you betray her trust, if you bring harm to her or our people, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth, and your death will last for days." "Understood," Jacob said simply. "And I give you my word, I would die before betraying your sister's kindness." The two men locked eyes, and some understanding passed between them that Nalin could not quite read. Then Kuruk turned to her, his expression still angry but no longer murderous. "You have complicated everything, sister. The elders will need to know. Grandmother will need to decide what is to be done." "Then take me to grandmother," Nalin said. "Let her wisdom guide us," Kuruk nodded slowly. "But he stays here, under guard. I will send 2 warriors I trust to watch him." He looked at Jacob again. "Do not make me regret letting you live, settler." As Kuruk left the cave to arrange for guards, Nalin knelt beside Jacob once more. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I have made everything worse." "You saved my life," Jacob replied, his good eye finding hers. "Everything else we'll figure out as it comes." He reached into his torn shirt pocket and withdrew a small silver locket, pressing it into her palm. "Take this. If something happens to me, if I don't survive what's coming, there's a letter inside. See that it reaches my sister in Missouri. Her address is written there." Nalin opened the locket and saw 2 photographs, a woman with kind eyes and a small child, perhaps 3 years old, smiling at the camera. The loss Jacob had spoken of was there in faded images, a family stolen by fever, a life that had been and could never be again. "I will keep it safe," she promised, tucking the locket into her medicine pouch. "But you will survive, Jacob Stone. I did not defy my people and risk everything just to watch you die now." He smiled at that, a real smile despite the pain it must have caused his split lip. "Yes, ma'am, Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Nalin knew that by tomorrow, everyone in her village would know what she had done. Her life, her position, everything she had known, was about to change in ways she could not predict. But looking at the man she had saved, seeing the fundamental decency in his battered face, she could not bring herself to regret her choice. Her grandmother had spoken of standing between two worlds. Now in this cave with this wounded settler and her warrior brother outside arranging guards, Nalin felt herself suspended between those worlds, holding them apart but also, perhaps, holding them together. The courage to choose mercy over hate had been the easy part, she realized. Living with the consequences of that choice would be where her true strength would be tested. True to his word, Kuruk returned within the hour with two warriors, older men who had fought in many battles and whose judgment he trusted. They positioned themselves at the cave entrance with expressions of stern disapproval, but no outward hostility. Whatever Kuruk had told them, it had been enough to secure their cooperation, if not their approval. Nalin left Jacob in their reluctant care and followed her brother back toward the village. They walked in heavy silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the evening calls of birds settling for the night. The desert was cooling rapidly now, the brutal heat of day giving way to the chill that would settle over the land by midnight. "Grandmother knew," Kuruk said finally, not looking at his sister. "She knew you would do this. She told me you would need guidance but not interference. I thought she meant you would need help finding herbs." He shook his head. "I should have known better. Grandmother's words are never simple. You are not angry." "I am furious," Kuruk corrected, his voice tight. "You have put yourself in danger. You have violated sacred ground and tribal law. You have saved an enemy and brought him to the heart of our territory." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "But I am also," he struggled for words, "I am also proud that my sister has the courage to follow her conscience even when it costs her everything." Nalin felt tears sting her eyes. She had expected rage, expected to be cast out or worse. This mixture of anger and reluctant admiration was harder to bear than simple condemnation would have been. "What will happen now?" she asked. "The council will meet tonight. They will decide." Kuruk started walking again. "But first, Grandmother wants to see you. She sent me to find you before I even told her what you had done." She already knew. They reached the village as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in orange and gold. Nalin could feel eyes on her as they passed through the camp, could sense the whispered conversations that stopped when she drew near. Word had already spread somehow. Perhaps the warriors Kuruk had sent to guard Jacob had talked, or perhaps the spirits themselves had carried the news on the wind. Her grandmother waited outside her dwelling, sitting on a worn blanket with the patience of stone. Despite her age, her back was straight and her eyes missed nothing. She gestured for Nalin to sit beside her, and Kuruk withdrew to give them privacy. For a long moment, the old woman said nothing. She simply looked at her granddaughter with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. Finally she spoke. "Tell me about him. Not what he did or why you saved him. Tell me who he is." Nalin had expected many questions, but not this one. She thought carefully before answering. "He is a man who has known great loss and carries it with grace. He is someone who tried to build bridges when everyone else was building walls. He speaks our language badly but tries, which is more than most of his people do. She paused, surprised by her own words. "He looks at me and sees a person, not an enemy. Not a savage or a prize or a threat. Just a person," her grandmother nodded slowly. "And when you look at him, I see someone who did not deserve to die. Someone who might help bring peace if given the chance." Nalin met her grandmother's eyes. "I see someone I could not walk away from, even knowing it would cost me everything." "Good," the old woman said, and Nalin blinked in surprise. "If you had saved him only from pity or duty, the spirits would not have guided you to him. But you saved him because you recognized something true in his soul. That is wisdom. The council may not see it that way. The council will see what they wish to see, as people always do." Her grandmother reached out and took Nalin's hand. "But I will tell them what the spirits have shown me." I will tell them that you are the bridge between worlds that our people need. That this man represents a chance for understanding we have not had before. And if they do not listen, then we will deal with what comes." The old woman squeezed her hand. "But first I must meet this man who has earned such loyalty from my granddaughter. Take me to him." The journey back to the cave was slower with her grandmother setting the pace, but the old woman moved with surprising steadiness. Kuruk accompanied them, along with 2 other elders who had joined without being asked. This was no longer just Nalin's choice. It had become something larger, a test of the tribe's willingness to see beyond old hatreds. At the cave, the guards stood aside respectfully as the elders approached. Nalin led the way into the dim interior, where Jacob still sat against the wall. He had managed to pull himself into a more upright position, though the effort had clearly cost him. When he saw them enter, he attempted to rise, but Nalin's grandmother raised a hand to stop him. "Stay," she said in English, her accent thick, but her words clear. "You are injured, I am old. Neither of us has anything to prove by standing." She settled herself on the cave floor with Nalin's help, studying Jacob with those penetrating eyes. The other elders remained standing, their expressions carefully neutral, but their attention absolute. Kuruk positioned himself near the entrance, hand near his knife, ready for anything. "My granddaughter tells me you tried to make peace between our peoples," the old woman said. "Is this true?" "Yes, ma'am," Jacob replied, his voice still rough. "Though I failed more often than I succeeded." "Peacemaking always fails more than it succeeds," she said with a slight smile. "That is why so few attempt it. Those who do are either fools or the bravest among us. Which are you?" Jacob considered the question seriously. "Probably some of both." This answer seemed to please her. "Good. Only a fool would claim to be purely brave, and only the arrogant would not recognize their own foolishness." She leaned forward. "The man who tried to kill you. Tell me about him." Jacob took a careful breath and began to speak, his words measured and precise. He told them about Dutch Carver, about the gang of outlaws who had been operating in the territory for years. He detailed the pattern of crimes: cattle theft, land fraud, murder, and how Carver had slowly built a network of influence that protected him from prosecution. "He wants war," Jacob said, his damaged voice carrying conviction despite its roughness. Not because he believes in any cause, but because chaos is profitable. When settlers and Apache are killing each other, no one notices land deeds changing hands or cattle disappearing. No one questions when people flee their homesteads and Carver's men move in to claim them. The elders exchanged glances, and Nalin could see that Jacob's words resonated with their own observations. They had seen the pattern too, had wondered at the timing of certain raids and reprisals. "You have proof of this?" one of the elders asked, an older man named Tasunke who had lost 2 sons to settler violence. "I did. Documents, witness statements, maps showing the land Carver has illegally claimed. All of it hidden at my homestead." Jacob's expression turned bitter. "Which is now occupied by his men. Without that evidence, I have only my word." "The word of a settler means nothing," Tasunke said flatly. "Perhaps," Jacob acknowledged. "But consider this. Why would Carver try to kill me if I wasn't a threat to him? Why go to the trouble of framing me with false wanted posters, of staging my death in Apache territory? If I was just another settler, he would have shot me and left my body in a ditch somewhere." Nalin's grandmother nodded slowly. "He speaks sense. The elaborate nature of his murder suggests he was indeed dangerous to this Carver." She looked at Jacob with renewed interest. "Tell me about the locket you gave my granddaughter." Jacob's eye widened slightly, surprised that she knew about it. He glanced at Nalin, who touched the medicine pouch at her side, where she had placed it for safekeeping. "My wife and daughter," he said quietly. "They died 4 years ago. Yellow fever. I came west after that, trying to outrun the grief, trying to find some purpose in a life that suddenly felt empty. And did you find purpose?" "I thought I had. I thought if I could help prevent the kind of senseless violence that destroys families, if I could build even small bridges between peoples who saw each other as enemies, then maybe their deaths would mean something." Maybe I could honor their memory by preventing other children from losing parents, other parents from losing children. The cave fell silent. Even Kuruk, who had maintained his hostile stance throughout, seemed moved by Jacob's words. Here was grief they all understood, loss they all shared. In that moment, the line between settler and Apache blurred, became irrelevant against the universal pain of losing loved ones. Nalin's grandmother closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them, they glistened with tears she did not shed. The spirits speak truly. You are a man of honor trapped in dishonorable times. My granddaughter was right to save you. Grandmother, Tasunke protested, he is still a settler. His people have done terrible things, yes, the old woman interrupted. As have ours, as have all people since the beginning of time. But this man, this particular man, has tried to be different. And for that attempt, his own kind tried to murder him. That alone should tell us something. She turned back to Jacob. If we help you, if we give you sanctuary and assistance in recovering your evidence, what then? What do you offer us in return? Jacob met her gaze steadily. The truth. Public knowledge of Carver's crimes. An end to his operations, which have hurt your people as much as mine. And, he paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. And my continued efforts to build understanding between our peoples. I cannot promise success. I cannot promise that others will listen, but I can promise that I will never stop trying. The old woman nodded. That is enough. We will take this to the council tonight. She rose with Nalin's help, her bones creaking but her spirit undiminished. You will stay here under guard until we decide. But know this, Jacob Stone, I have seen you in my dreams. I've seen you standing beside my granddaughter, holding back the darkness that would consume us all. The spirits have marked you as important to our future, whether we understand why or not. As the elders filed out, Kuruk lingered, his eyes on Jacob. Do not make my grandmother wrong about you, he said quietly. Do not make my sister regret her choice. Because if you do, there will be nowhere in this world you can hide from me. Understood, Jacob replied simply. When they were alone again, Nalin remained, wanting to check his bandages before she left. As she worked, Jacob spoke softly. Your grandmother is remarkable. I've met few people with such presence, such wisdom. She has lived through much, seen much, lost much. Nalin adjusted the wrapping on his neck, noting with satisfaction that the bleeding had stopped. She was married to a great chief who tried to negotiate peace with the first settlers in this region. He was murdered during a parley, shot in the back while under a flag of truce. I'm sorry. She could have chosen hatred after that. Many urged her to counsel war, to seek revenge. Instead, she chose to teach that not all settlers were responsible for one man's treachery. It made her unpopular with some, but time has proven her wisdom. Those who sought only revenge are dead now. She survives. Jacob absorbed this in silence, then said, She's right, you know, about you being a bridge. You have the courage to see people as individuals rather than enemies. That's rare. Nalin felt heat rise to her cheeks and busied herself with repacking her medicine pouch. I only did what felt right. That's what courage is, Jacob said. Doing what feels right even when everything else tells you not to. Before Nalin could respond, voices echoed from outside, more warriors arriving to relieve the guards. Her time here was over. She needed to return to the village for the council meeting that would decide both their fates. I will come back tomorrow, she promised, with food and fresh water, and word of what the council decides. Thank you, Jacob said, for everything. Whatever happens, I want you to know, meeting you has reminded me why I came west in the first place, why I believed people could be better than their worst instincts. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost. Nalin did not trust herself to speak. She simply nodded and left the cave, her heart fuller and more confused than it had ever been. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the village, the council fire would soon be lit. Her fate and Jacob's hung in the balance. But as she walked back through the cooling desert, Nalin found she was not afraid. Whatever came, she had made her choice with open eyes and a clear conscience. That would have to be enough. The council fire burned bright against the night sky, its flames casting dancing shadows across the faces of those gathered. 20 elders sat in a circle, their expressions grave as they listened to Nalin's grandmother speak. She held an ornate ceremonial pipe, carved from red stone and decorated with intricate symbols, a pipe that had belonged to her late husband, the chief, who had died seeking peace. Nalin sat outside the circle, as was proper for one not yet an elder, but close enough to hear every word. Kuruk sat beside her, his presence both supportive and protective. Around them, much of the village had gathered to witness the council's deliberation. This was not merely about Nalin's transgression, it was about the tribe's direction, their willingness to consider new paths forward. "My granddaughter has brought us a choice," the old woman was saying, smoke from the pipe wreathing her words in sacred fragrance. "We can see her actions as betrayal, as weakness, as dangerous foolishness. Or we can see them as the spirits intended, as an opportunity to break the cycle of violence that has claimed so many of our people." Tasunke, who had questioned Jacob in the cave, spoke up. "With respect, Elder, how many opportunities have we been offered before? How many times have we been told that this settler or that official would be different, would treat us fairly? And how many times have those promises turned to blood and broken treaties?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. The history Tasunke invoked was written in scars and graves, in burned villages and stolen children. It was not a history that encouraged trust. "You speak truth," Nalin's grandmother acknowledged. "We have been betrayed many times. But answer me this: does the past betrayal of some justify assuming betrayal from all? If we cannot distinguish between those who mean us harm and those who seek peace, how are we different from those who see all Apache as savages worthy only of death?" The question hung in the air, challenging and uncomfortable. Another elder, a woman named Kiona, who had survived 3 separate attacks on her family, leaned forward. "The settler speaks well, I grant you, but words are cheap. How do we know his intentions are true? How do we know he will not lead us into a trap, that his evidence is not bait for some larger scheme?" "We don't," Kuruk said suddenly, surprising everyone by speaking. As a warrior, and not an elder, his voice carried less weight, but the elders allowed him to continue. "We cannot know for certain, but I saw his face when I found him with my sister. I saw the wounds Carver's men inflicted. I saw the rope burns on his neck. If this is a scheme, it is elaborate beyond reason. And what of bringing him to sacred ground?" Another elder challenged. "That violation alone was necessary," Nalin's grandmother interrupted firmly. "The cave was closest. Time was critical. And before you speak of violations, remember that those caves have seen worse in our history. They have sheltered wounded enemies before. In times when mercy served a greater purpose than vengeance." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I am old. I have lived through the worst of the conflicts. I've buried my husband, my sons, my grandchildren. I have seen our numbers dwindle and our lands shrink. And I tell you this, continuing on the path we have walked will lead only to our extinction. Not tomorrow, perhaps not even in 10 years, but inevitably. The settlers are too many, their weapons too powerful. We can fight with honor and die, or we can find another way to survive. Survival without honor is not survival at all," Tasunke said. But his voice lacked conviction. "I do not speak of surrender," the old woman countered. "I speak of wisdom. This man, Jacob Stone, has information that could damage our enemies. He offers an alliance of convenience. We help him, he helps us. After that, if he proves false, we lose nothing we have not already lost. But if he proves true, we gain something precious, proof that not all settlers are our enemies, and an ally who understands both worlds." The debate continued for hours, voices rising and falling as different perspectives were aired. Some argued for executing Jacob as a warning to other settlers. Others suggested releasing him far from their territory and washing their hands of the matter. A few, influenced by the grandmother's words, began to see the potential in the situation. Finally, as the fire burned low and the night grew deep, the council reached its decision. The eldest among them, a man called Grey Hawk, who rarely spoke but commanded absolute respect when he did, raised his hand for silence. "We will allow the settler to remain under guard while he heals," he announced. "Nalin will continue to tend his wounds, as befits her role as healer. When he is strong enough, warriors will accompany him to recover his evidence. If the evidence proves real and valuable, we will consider further alliance. If it proves false, or if he betrays our trust, his life is forfeit." Does the council agree? One by one, hands rose in assent. Not unanimous. Several elders kept their hands lowered, their disapproval clear, but enough agreement to make it official. Nalin felt her brother's hand squeeze her shoulder, and she exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. "As for Nalin," Greyhawk continued, "she acted without council permission and violated sacred ground. However, she acted in accordance with her healer's oath and with proper intention. She will be censured but not punished. The matter is closed." The council dissolved, elders rising and moving off to their dwellings. Some shot Nalin dark looks as they passed, while others nodded with what might have been approval, or at least understanding. Her grandmother approached, moving slowly, the ceremonial pipe now carefully wrapped and tucked under her arm. "You have bought him time," she said quietly. "Use it well. Help him heal quickly, because the longer he remains among us, the more some will see him as a symbol of everything they hate. Speed will serve you both." Over the following days, Nalin fell into a routine. Each morning, she would make the journey to the cave, bringing food, water, and fresh medicines. The guards, rotating pairs of warriors assigned by Kuruk, would step aside respectfully, their initial hostility gradually softening as they saw Jacob's genuine gratitude and respectful manner. Jacob's body healed with surprising speed, testament to both his constitution and Nalin's skill. The swelling around his eye faded, revealing eyes that were a startling blue-gray, like storm clouds over water. The rope burns on his neck scabbed over and began to heal, though they would leave permanent scars, a reminder of how close he had come to death. But more than his physical healing, it was the conversations that grew between them. At first, their exchanges were practical, discussions of his injuries, his needs, his discomfort. But gradually, as Jacob's voice grew stronger and the pain receded, they began to talk of other things. He told her about his life before the West, about growing up in Pennsylvania on a small farm, about meeting his wife at a church social when they were both 17. He spoke of his daughter with a tenderness that made Nalin's heart ache, describing how she had loved flowers and butterflies, how her laughter had been the finest sound he had ever heard. "She would have liked you," he said one afternoon, his voice thoughtful. "Sarah, my wife, she had your same spirit, compassionate but strong. She never backed down from what she believed was right, even when it made life harder." Nalin, in turn, found herself sharing stories she rarely told. About her mother, dead now for 10 years, who had taught her the healing arts. About her father, killed in a raid when she was 12, who had been known for his wisdom and fairness. About the siblings she had lost, the friends who had fallen, the slow erosion of her people's way of life. "Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting for survival or just delaying the inevitable," she admitted during one of these conversations. "More settlers come every year. We cannot hold back the tide forever." "Maybe you don't have to," Jacob said. "Maybe there's a way to adapt without disappearing. To keep what matters, your culture, your identity, your dignity, while finding ways to coexist with the changes." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple at all," he acknowledged. "It would require compromise on both sides, which is the hardest thing for people to accept. It would require settlers to see Apache as equals, and Apache to see settlers as something other than invaders. Neither side is ready for that, but you are ready for it." "I try to be," Jacob said. "Doesn't mean I always succeed. I carry my own prejudices, my own assumptions. But I've learned that the moment you see someone as fully human, with hopes and fears and loves and losses just like your own, it becomes impossible to hate them." These philosophical discussions were interrupted by more practical matters. Jacob taught Nalin some English words she did not know, and she corrected his Apache pronunciation with patient persistence. He showed her how settlers tracked game differently than her people did, and she showed him tracking techniques that had been perfected over generations. They shared knowledge like traders exchanging goods, each offering the other glimpses into a different world. On the fifth day, Kuruk joined them in the cave. He had been watching from a distance, Nalin knew, monitoring both her safety and Jacob's behavior. Now he entered and sat, studying Jacob with the intensity of a warrior assessing potential threat or ally. "You say you have evidence against this carver," Kuruk said without preamble. "Tell me exactly where it is hidden and how we might retrieve it." Jacob, recognizing the significance of Kuruk's interest, sat up straighter despite the lingering pain in his ribs. "There's a false panel in the floor of my cabin, beneath the table. It holds a leather journal documenting 3 years of Carver's activities, along with maps showing land he's claimed illegally and letters proving he murdered the previous sheriff. And you believe this evidence would be enough to bring him to justice? If it reaches the territorial governor, yes. The governor is an honest man, from what I've learned. But getting the evidence to him would require traveling to the capital, which is a week's ride through territory Carver controls." Kuruk nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Carver has how many men?" "His gang is about 20 strong, but not all of them are at my homestead. He spreads them around to maintain control of different areas. I'd estimate 6 to 8 men occupying the property at any given time." 6 to 8 men, Kuruk repeated, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "That is manageable. It's also a trap," Jacob warned. "Carver expects me to try to retrieve the evidence. His men will be watching for any approach. Then it is fortunate they will be watching for you, and not for Apache warriors." Kuruk stood, his decision apparently made. "I will take this to Greyhawk. If he approves, we will recover your evidence. But know this, Stone. If the evidence is not there, if this is some elaborate deception, you will not leave that cave alive." "I understand," Jacob said. "And I give you my word, everything I've told you is true." After Kuruk left, Nalin continued her work in silence. She could feel Jacob watching her, could sense he wanted to say something, but was waiting for the right moment. Finally, he spoke. "Your brother is starting to trust me." "Kuruk does not trust easily," Nalin replied. "But he respects courage and honesty. You have shown him both." "And you?" Jacob asked quietly. "Do you trust me?" Nalin paused in her work, considering the question seriously. "I saved your life based on instinct and teaching. I've continued to help you based on my healer's oath. But trust," she met his eyes, "trust is something different. Trust must be earned over time, through consistent action and proved character. That's fair. But," she continued, surprising herself, "I am beginning to believe I will not regret saving you. That counts for something." The look Jacob gave her then was intense and complicated, carrying emotions she could not quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but also something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. She looked away, suddenly flustered, and busied herself with repacking her medicine pouch. "I should return to the village," she said, perhaps too abruptly. "The guards will change soon, and I need to prepare more salves." As she turned to leave, Jacob's voice stopped her. "Nalin, thank you for everything, but especially for giving me a reason to hope again." She did not turn back, did not trust herself to meet his eyes again. She simply nodded and left the cave, stepping out into the afternoon sun, with her heart beating faster than the walk warranted. Behind her, she heard one of the guards speak to Jacob in broken English. "The medicine woman, she is good person. You are lucky she found you." "I know," Jacob replied softly. "Luckiest day of my life." Nalin walked back toward the village, her medicine pouch feeling heavier than usual, not with herbs and bandages, but with the weight of something unnamed, something that frightened her more than Carver's outlaws or the council's judgment, something that felt like hope and danger mixed together in equal measure. Her grandmother was right. She was standing between 2 worlds now, but she was beginning to realize that the hardest part was not holding those worlds apart. It was navigating the space between them without losing herself in the process. The dark moon, rose over a darker land as 4 riders moved, through the desert like shadows given form. Kuruk led the way with the absolute confidence of someone who knew these territories in his bones. Behind him rode 2 other warriors, Swifthawk, known for his speed and stealth, and Standing Bear, whose size belied his ability to move in complete silence. Jacob brought up the rear, riding a borrowed horse with the ease of someone who had spent years in the saddle. They had left the Apache camp hours ago, timing their departure to reach Jacob's homestead in the deepest part of night, when guards would be drowsy and less alert. No words passed between them. Kuruk had made clear that silence would be maintained except in emergency. They communicated through hand signals Jacob had learned during their planning sessions, a language of gestures that transcended the barriers of spoken words. The landscape changed gradually as they rode, from open desert to rocky foothills, from scrubland to scattered stands of pine. Jacob's homestead occupied a strategic position near a reliable spring, which was precisely why Carver had wanted it. Good water was worth killing for in this harsh territory. As they approached the property, Kuruk raised his hand, and they all halted. Below them, sheltered in a small valley, Jacob's cabin stood illuminated by a single lantern burning in the window. The barn, the small corral, the shed, everything looked exactly as Jacob remembered, yet transformed by occupation. Horses moved restlessly in the corral, more than should have been there. 7, Jacob counted. More men than he had estimated. They dismounted and secured their horses in a sheltered spot, then moved forward on foot. The Apache warriors flowed across the terrain like water, their movements so fluid and silent that Jacob found himself struggling to keep pace, despite his own considerable skill. They had painted their faces with ash and charcoal to avoid reflecting moonlight, and Jacob had followed suit, feeling the cool paste on his skin like a mask transforming him into something other than himself. Kuruk led them to a position behind the barn, where they could observe without being seen. Jacob pointed to the cabin, then held up fingers, 1 guard visible on the porch, likely 2 more inside based on the number of horses. Where were the other 4 men? Swifthawk, whose eyes were legendarily sharp, pointed toward the main trail. 2 men there, positioned as lookouts. That accounted for 6. The 7th! Jacob felt unease prickle along his spine. 7 horses, 6 men accounted for. Something was wrong. Kuruk seemed to sense it too. He gestured for them to wait, to observe longer. Patience in warfare often meant the difference between success and disaster. And these warriors had learned that lesson through hard experience. 10 minutes passed, 20, then movement. The missing guard emerged from the outhouse, adjusting his gun belt and muttering curses that carried faintly on the night air. 7 men all accounted for. But still, Jacob's unease persisted. Finally, Kuruk signaled. Standing Bear would remain here as rear guard and emergency support. Swifthawk would neutralize the guard on the porch, non-lethally if possible, as this mission was for evidence, not vengeance. Kuruk and Jacob would enter through the back window, retrieve the journal and exit the same way. Simple, quick, efficient, they moved into position. Jacob watched Swifthawk approach the porch with movements so fluid and silent they seemed impossible. The guard never knew what happened. One moment he was sitting on a chair, the next Swifthawk's arm was around his neck, cutting off blood flow to the brain. In seconds the man slumped unconscious. Swifthawk lowered him gently and dragged him into the shadows. The back window, as Jacob had promised, was unlocked. He had never bothered with locks, believing that in this wild territory a determined thief would get in regardless, and an honest neighbor should always find welcome. That philosophy seemed foolish now, but it served them well tonight. Jacob eased the window open, cringing at the slight creak of old wood. He waited, listening for any response from inside. Nothing. He pulled himself through, Kuruk following with the fluid grace of a predator. Inside, the cabin felt alien and familiar simultaneously. His possessions remained, but had been disturbed, moved, pawed through by careless hands. His books lay scattered, his few photographs face down on the table, as if the images of his dead family had offended the outlaws. Rage flared in Jacob's chest, but he pushed it down. Emotion was a liability now. Focus was everything. Two men slept in what had been his bedroom, visible through the open door. Their snoring was the only sound beyond the ticking of Jacob's old clock on the mantel. He pointed to the table, then to the floor beneath it. Kuruk nodded understanding. They moved together toward the table. Jacob knelt and felt along the floorboards, finding the one that was slightly shorter than the others. He pressed the hidden catch he had carved into the wood, and the panel lifted silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside the hidden compartment, exactly where he had left it, lay the leather journal. But as Jacob reached for it, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Beside the journal lay a folded piece of paper that had not been there before, and on top of it, gleaming in the faint moonlight from the window, was a tarnished sheriff's badge. Jacob froze. This was new. This was wrong. He looked at Kuruk, whose eyes had narrowed with suspicion. Carefully, Jacob lifted the journal and the badge, then unfolded the paper beneath. It was a letter, written in an elegant hand that spoke of education and refinement. Jacob read it quickly, his mind racing to process the implications. It was correspondence between Carver and someone in the territorial government, discussing payments and percentages. But what made Jacob's hands begin to shake was the signature at the bottom. The letter was signed by the territorial governor himself. Understanding crashed over Jacob like a physical blow. Carver was not operating independently. He had protection at the highest level of territorial government. The man Jacob had planned to take his evidence to was the very man who had been enabling Carver's crimes. The governor received a percentage of every illegal land sale, every head of stolen cattle, every fraudulent claim. The entire system was corrupt from top to bottom, and the sheriff's badge, Carver wore it openly now, Jacob realized. He had not merely killed the previous sheriff. He had taken his place with the governor's blessing. That was why no law had stopped him, why his crimes continued unchecked. He was the law. Jacob's mind reeled with the implications. Everything he had thought, every plan he had made, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Taking evidence to the territorial governor would not bring justice. It would likely result in his immediate execution and the destruction of anyone who had helped him. Kuruk, reading Jacob's expression, reached for the letter. His command of written English was limited, but he grasped enough to understand the significance. His face hardened, and he gestured urgently toward the window. They needed to leave, now, but as they turned to go, Jacob's foot caught the edge of the table. The slight sound it made, barely more than a whisper, was enough. One of the sleeping men grunted and shifted, then stopped snoring, then sat up. "Who's there?" The voice was groggy, but growing alert fast. Jacob and Kuruk froze, pressed against the wall beside the door. Jacob's hand went to the knife at his belt. Kuruk already had his out, the blade catching faint light. The outlaw stumbled out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes. For a moment he stood there, vulnerable and half asleep. Jacob could have killed him easily. Should have, perhaps, by the ruthless logic of survival. But he hesitated. This was a man, not just an enemy. A man who might have family, who might have been forced into Carver's gang by circumstances beyond his control. That moment of mercy cost them. The outlaw's eyes adjusted and he saw them. His mouth opened to shout an alarm. Kuruk moved like lightning, crossing the space and clamping his hand over the man's mouth while driving his knee into the outlaw's stomach, folding him over. But the damage was done. The commotion had awakened the second sleeper, who came charging out with a gun already in hand. The gun fired, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet missed Jacob by inches, slamming into the wall behind him. He dove for cover as Kuruk released the first man and threw his knife in one fluid motion. The blade took the shooter in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending the gun clattering across the floor. Outside, shouts erupted. The guards from the trail were coming. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before being surrounded. Kuruk grabbed Jacob's arm and hauled him toward the window. They went through together, tumbling into the dirt outside just as more gunfire erupted from the cabin. Bullets punched through the walls, searching blindly for targets. Swift Hawk appeared from the shadows, covering their retreat with his bow. 2 arrows flew in quick succession, and Jacob heard cries from the direction of the approaching guards. Not killing shots, Swift Hawk aimed for legs, for arms, shots that would slow pursuit without taking lives. Even in combat, the Apache warriors maintained their discipline, their honor. They ran for the barn, where Standing Bear waited. Behind them chaos erupted, men shouting, guns firing, lanterns being lit. The whole homestead came alive with activity, like kicking a hornet's nest. At the barn, their horses waited. They mounted in a flurry of motion, Jacob clutching the journal and the badge, and that damning letter against his chest. Kuruk led them away from the cabin, not back the way they had come, but toward rougher terrain, where horses could not easily follow. Gunfire chased them into the darkness, muzzle flashes like angry fireflies. Jacob heard a bullet whine past his ear, felt another tug at his shirt. But they were moving fast now, low over their horses' necks, and the darkness was their ally. They rode hard for an hour, putting distance between themselves and pursuit. Finally, Kuruk called a halt in a sheltered canyon where the walls would hide them and muffle any sound. The horses were lathered with sweat, blowing hard, but they had made it. Anyone injured? Kuruk demanded in Apache. The warriors checked themselves and each other. Swift Hawk had taken a shallow graze across his arm, but it was minor. Standing Bear was unharmed. Jacob discovered a bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder. Painful, but not life-threatening. Missing bone and major vessels. We need to keep moving, Jacob said, pressing his hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. They'll track us at first light. Let them try, Kuruk said with grim satisfaction. We are in our territory now, on our land. They will not find us. But his expression turned serious as he looked at the documents Jacob still clutched. What did you find in there? What made you look like you had seen a ghost? Jacob explained, his voice tight with frustration and betrayal. He showed them the letter, translating its contents. He held up the tarnished badge, explaining its significance. As he spoke, he watched comprehension dawn on the warriors' faces, watched their expressions shift from triumph at a successful raid to understanding of how much more complicated everything had just become. So the evidence is worthless, Standing Bear said flatly. We risked our lives for papers that cannot help us. No, Jacob said slowly, an idea forming even as he spoke. The evidence is more valuable than ever. We just cannot take it to the territorial governor. We need to go over his head to the federal government, to someone beyond the reach of territorial corruption. And who would that be? Kuruk asked. The United States Marshal Service. They answer directly to the Attorney General, not to territorial authorities. And I know there's a marshal operating out of Santa Fe, John Crawford. He's known for being incorruptible, for going after powerful men when others look away. Santa Fe is 2 weeks' ride from here, Swift Hawk observed, through territory where we will be hunted every mile. I know, Jacob acknowledged. But it's the only path forward. And more than that, he looked at the letter again, at the damning words in elegant script. This corruption goes deep. If the governor is involved, others are too. How many territorial officials are on Carver's payroll? How many judges, sheriffs, land office clerks? The whole system is rotten. Kuruk's expression turned thoughtful. This affects my people as much as yours. If the government is corrupt, if officials profit from chaos between settlers and Apache, then they have reasons to maintain that chaos. To prevent peace. Exactly, Jacob said. Every raid that fails to be investigated, every treaty that gets broken, every time violence is met with more violence instead of justice, someone profits. Carver and the governor and whoever else is involved. They need us fighting each other so no one looks too closely at what they're doing. The implications settled over them like a weight. This was bigger than one outlaw and one corrupt governor. This was systematic exploitation of an entire territory's conflict, the deliberate perpetuation of hatred and violence for profit. We must take this to Greyhawk, Kuruk said finally. The council must know. This changes everything. They rode through what remained of the night, moving at a more sustainable pace now that the immediate pursuit had been left behind. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they approached the Apache camp from a direction that would be recognized. that would not trigger defensive measures. Sentries challenged them, then waved them through when they recognized Kuruk. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the center of camp, the council was already assembling. Grey Hawk, Nalin's grandmother, and the other elders gathered in the pre-dawn twilight, their faces grave. Nalin appeared, running from her dwelling when she heard they had returned. Her eyes found Jacob immediately, found the blood seeping through his makeshift bandage, the exhaustion and stress written in every line of his body. She came to him without hesitation, without regard for propriety or what others might think. "You are hurt," she said, already reaching for his shoulder. "I'll live," Jacob assured her. "But Nalin, we found something that changes everything." Greyhawk's voice cut through the gathering crowd. "Show us." Jacob dismounted, wincing at the pain in his shoulder, and approached the council. He laid out the journal, the badge, and the letter. As the eastern sky grew lighter, he explained what they had found, what it meant, the extent of the corruption they were facing. The elders passed the letter around, those who could read English translating for those who could not. Faces grew darker as understanding spread. This was not merely about one outlaw. This was about a system designed to exploit them, to profit from their suffering and their deaths. Nalin's grandmother spoke into the heavy silence. "The spirits showed me darkness, but I did not understand its shape until now. This corruption is like poison in water. It spreads everywhere, touches everything, kills slowly and surely." "What do we do?" Tasunke asked, and for the first time Jacob heard not hostility, but genuine question in the elder's voice. "If the territorial government itself is against us, how do we fight?" "We expose them," Jacob said. "We take this evidence to the federal marshal in Santa Fe. We bring in authority that cannot be bought or threatened by territorial corruption. It will take time and it will be dangerous, but it is the only way to break this cycle. And in the meantime," another elder asked, "Carver knows you survived now, knows we helped you. He will come for us." "Then we prepare," Kuruk said, his voice carrying the certainty of a warrior who had faced impossible odds before. "We defend ourselves, but we also protect this evidence and the man who will carry it to Santa Fe. Because if we succeed, we do not merely survive, we change everything." The discussion continued as the sun rose fully, bathing the camp in golden light. Plans were made, strategies debated, resources allocated. Through it all, Jacob stood with Nalin at his side, her hand finding his when she thought no one was looking. They had gone seeking evidence to stop one man's crimes. What they had found instead was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power, a systematic exploitation of an entire territory's conflicts. The task ahead seemed impossible, the odds overwhelming, but as Jacob looked around at the gathered elders, at Kuruk and the warriors, at Nalin, whose courage had started this entire journey, he felt something he had not felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty. They would fight this corruption. They would expose these crimes. They would build something better from the ashes of this broken system. The journey had just become far more dangerous and far more important than any of them had imagined. But they would walk it together, Apache and settler, former enemies united by a common cause, and the belief that justice, true justice, was worth any risk. The decision to send Jacob to Santa Fe with the evidence was not made lightly or quickly. For 3 days, the council debated while warriors prepared for the retaliation they knew was coming. Carver would not let their raid go unanswered. He could not, without appearing weak to his men and his corrupt allies. The question was not if he would attack, but when and how. Nalin spent those 3 days treating Jacob's shoulder wound, which had proven more serious than he initially admitted. The bullet had passed through cleanly, but had damaged muscle and tissue. She worked with patient skill, changing dressings, applying poultices to prevent infection, forcing him to rest when he wanted to help with preparations. "You cannot ride to Santa Fe with a festering wound," she told him firmly when he protested. "You must heal enough to survive 2 weeks of hard travel. That means rest now, no matter how much you wish to help." They were in her dwelling, which had become his recovery space. Her grandmother had insisted on it, overriding objections about propriety with the blunt observation that Nalin was the best healer available and Jacob needed the best care. The arrangement had raised eyebrows, but no serious opposition. Too much else demanded attention for anyone to worry about traditional restrictions. Jacob sat on the mat where he slept, shirtless so Nalin could work on his shoulder. The morning light filtered through the hide walls, casting everything in warm amber tones. As she cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency, he studied her face, the concentration in her eyes, the slight furrow between her brows when she encountered something concerning, the way her lips pressed together when she was thinking. "Nalin," he said quietly, "if I don't come back from Santa Fe—" "You will come back," she interrupted, not looking up from her work. "But if I don't," he persisted, "I need you to know that these days here, knowing you, being part of your world, they've been the most meaningful of my life since I lost my family. You gave me back my purpose, my hope, my belief that people can be better than their circumstances." Now she did look up, her dark eyes meeting his. "Then you must come back, because I am not finished with you yet. There is too much still to learn, too much to understand about this world where Apache and settler might stand together instead of apart. I'll do my best," he promised. "Your best is considerable," she said, a slight smile touching her lips. "After all, you survived Carver's rope, his bullets, and my brother's suspicion. Santa Fe should be simple by comparison." Before Jacob could respond, Kuruk entered without announcement, his face set in grim lines. "The scouts have returned. Carver is gathering men, not just his usual gang. He is calling in others, offering payment for anyone willing to ride with him. They are saying 30 men, maybe more." Jacob felt his stomach drop. 30 men against the village would be a massacre, even with the Apache warriors' superior skills and knowledge of terrain. "When? 3 days, perhaps 4. They gather supplies, weapons. This will not be a quick raid. They mean to destroy us completely." Kuruk's expression was controlled, but Jacob could see the fear beneath. "Greyhawk is calling for the women, children, and elders to evacuate to the winter camp in the mountains. The warriors will remain, prepare defenses, try to buy time for the evacuation." "No," Jacob said immediately, trying to rise despite Nalin's restraining hand. "This is my fault. Carver is coming because of me. I should leave, draw him away from here. You think his corruption has not already affected my people?" Kuruk countered. "You think the territorial governor taking bribes to ignore crimes does not touch us? No, Stone, this fight was coming regardless. You simply forced it to happen now rather than later, and gave us knowledge that might save us." Nalin's grandmother appeared in the doorway, moving with the careful deliberation that belied the sharpness of her mind. "The council has decided. Jacob will leave tomorrow for Santa Fe, accompanied by Swift Hawk and 2 other warriors. They will travel fast and light, avoiding settlements where Carver might have allies. The rest of us will prepare for siege." "Grandmother, you should evacuate with the others," Nalin said urgently. "I'm too old to run through mountains," the old woman replied calmly. "And someone must remain with the warriors to tend wounds, to provide wisdom when hot blood might lead to foolish choices. You, however, will go with the evacuation." "No," Nalin said flatly. "My place is here. I am the best healer we have. The warriors will need me. Your place is with the survivors," her grandmother countered. "If this village falls, if we all die here, our people need someone who understands what was learned, what was attempted." "You carry that knowledge, granddaughter. You must survive to tell the story." The argument that followed was conducted in rapid Apache, too fast for Jacob to follow completely. But he understood the essence. Nalin's grandmother was ordering her to leave, and Nalin was refusing with equal determination. Finally, Greyhawk himself intervened. "Both of you will be silent and listen," the old warrior commanded, his voice cutting through their debate. "Nalin will remain for 2 days to help prepare medicines, to instruct others in treating battle wounds. On the 3rd day, regardless of whether Carver has arrived, she will leave with the evacuation. This is decided. There will be no further argument." Neither woman looked happy with this compromise, but both bowed their heads in acceptance. Greyhawk's word was law, and neither would undermine his authority even when they disagreed. Over the next 2 days, the village transformed into a fortress. Warriors dug defensive positions, created obstacles on the approaches, cached weapons and water at strategic points. Nalin worked almost without rest, preparing supplies of medicine, bundles of herbs for different wounds, salves for burns, poultices for infection. She taught younger healers what she could, passing on knowledge that usually took years to acquire. Jacob helped where his injury allowed, which frustrated him immensely. He was used to being useful, to physical labor and decisive action. Now he could barely lift his left arm without pain shooting through his shoulder. He cleaned weapons with his good hand, checked and rechecked the journal and documents that would be his cargo, tried to memorize every detail in case something happened to the physical evidence. On the evening of the second day, Nalin's grandmother called Jacob to her dwelling. She sat by a small fire, the ceremonial pipe from the council resting beside her. When Jacob entered and sat across from her, she studied him for a long moment. "My granddaughter loves you," she said without preamble. "Do not bother denying it. I have eyes and I have lived too long to mistake the signs. The question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Jacob had not expected such directness, but he met her gaze steadily. "I love her too, but I don't know what that means in practical terms. Our peoples are at war. Even if I succeed in Santa Fe, even if I bring back federal marshals and expose the corruption, there will still be generations of hatred to overcome." "True," she acknowledged. "But you have already begun that work. You and Nalin together. You are proof that the hatred is not absolute, that individuals can choose different paths." She leaned forward. "I am old, Stone. I will not survive what is coming, whether it is Carver's bullets or simply the weight of my years. Before I die, I need to know that what I have taught, what I have believed about the possibility of peace, will continue." "Grandmother, you'll survive this," Jacob protested. "You're stronger than—" She raised a hand, silencing him. "Do not lie to comfort an old woman. I know my time comes soon. I have seen it in dreams, felt it in my bones. But I also see beyond my death, and I see you and Nalin building something new. Not Apache, not settler, but something that honors both. That is my hope, Stone. That is what I need you to promise me, that you will protect her, learn from her, help her create the world we have dreamed of but never lived to see." Jacob felt tears prick his eyes. "I promise. With everything I am, I promise." The old woman smiled, and in that smile Jacob saw not just her, but all the ancestors she represented, all the wisdom accumulated across generations. She reached into a bundle beside her and withdrew an eagle feather, pristine white with brown tips, bound with leather and beads. "This belonged to my husband, the chief who died seeking peace. It represents courage that transcends violence, strength that lifts others rather than crushing them. I give it to you now, Jacob Stone, as I give you my blessing. You are no longer merely a settler or an outsider. You are family, recognized by me and by the spirits. Carry this with you, and remember that you ride not just for justice, but for all of us." Jacob accepted the feather with both hands, overcome by the weight of the gift and what it represented. A settler, blessed by an Apache elder, carrying a sacred object into battle against corruption that affected both their peoples. The symbolism was not lost on him. "I will honor this gift," he managed. "I will honor your trust and your granddaughter's love. I swear it." That night Nalin came to him in the hour before dawn. The village slept fitfully, warriors resting before the coming storm, families holding each other close. She entered his dwelling silently and sat beside him in the darkness. "I leave at first light," Jacob said. "The evacuation begins at noon. By the time Carver arrives, you'll be safely in the mountains." "I know." They sat in silence for a time, shoulders touching, sharing warmth against the pre-dawn chill. Finally Nalin spoke. "My grandmother gave you the eagle feather." "I saw it. She did. She gave me something else too, her blessing for us. For whatever this is between us." Nalin's breath caught. "She blessed us?" "She sees our future," she says. "Sees us building something new together. Sees hope beyond all this violence and corruption." Jacob turned to look at her, though in the darkness he could barely make out her features. "I don't know if her visions are prophecy or simply hope, but I know that I want that future. I want to build it with you, if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Nalin leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, chaste by some standards, but it carried the weight of every emotion they had been holding back. Fear, hope, love, determination. When they parted, Jacob could feel her smiling even in the darkness. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Ride fast, be careful, and come back. Because we have work to do, you and I. We have a world to change." "I'll come back," Jacob promised. "Nothing will stop me." As dawn broke over the desert, Jacob stood with Swifthawk and 2 other warriors, Running Deer and Stone Fist, checking their horses and supplies one final time. The journey to Santa Fe would take them through hostile territory where Carver's influence ran deep. They would avoid towns when possible, travel at night when necessary, and trust no one they met. Greyhawk approached as they prepared to mount. The old warrior placed his hand on Jacob's good shoulder, his weathered face serious. "You carry more than documents," he said. "You carry our hope that justice exists beyond the corruption of men. You carry proof that Apache and settler can work together toward common good. You carry the possibility of change. Do not fail us, Jacob Stone." "I won't," Jacob said. "I promise you, I will reach Santa Fe. I will find Marshal Crawford. I will expose Carver and the governor and everyone involved in this corruption. And I will return." "Good." Greyhawk smiled slightly. "My warriors will keep you alive on the journey. Try not to slow them down with your injured shoulder." Kuruk appeared, leading the horses. He handed Jacob the reins of a strong mare, steady and reliable. "Her name is Desert Wind. She will not fail you when you need speed." He clasped Jacob's forearm in the warrior's greeting. "Ride well, brother. Return safely. My sister will be insufferable if you do not." The word brother struck Jacob deeply. From Kuruk, who had wanted to kill him not 2 weeks ago, it represented a transformation as profound as any he had experienced. Nalin came last. Carrying a leather bag she pressed into his hands. "Medicine supplies for your shoulder. Change the dressing each night. Use the salve I have marked with red cord. And this," she pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft hide. "Food for the journey. And one more thing." From her medicine pouch she drew his locket, the one with photographs of his wife and daughter. She had kept it safe all this time, as he had asked. But now she opened it, and he saw that she had added something. Behind his family's pictures, she had placed a small strand of her own hair, braided and tied with thread. "So you carry us both," she said softly. "Your past and your future. Reminders of why you ride, why you must succeed, why you must return." Jacob could not speak past the lump in his throat. He simply pulled her close, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, holding her as if he could imprint the memory of this moment into his very bones. When they finally parted, the sun had fully risen. It was time. Jacob mounted Desert Wind, settling the medicine bag and the precious documents into his saddlebags. The eagle feather was tied securely to his saddle horn where he could see it, drawing strength from what it represented. Swifthawk led the way, with Jacob and the other warriors following. They rode out of the village at a steady pace, not looking back. Looking back would make leaving harder. But Jacob felt Nalin's eyes on him, until the desert swallowed them, felt the weight of all the hopes and dreams riding with him. Behind them, the village prepared for war. Ahead lay 2 weeks of dangerous travel and an uncertain reception in Santa Fe. But Jacob rode with purpose burning in his chest, stronger than pain, stronger than fear. He carried evidence that would expose corruption, yes. But more than that, he carried the possibility of change, the chance to build a world where Apache and settler need not be enemies, where justice applied equally to all, where people like Nalin and himself might build a future together. The sun climbed higher as they rode, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. 4 riders moving fast across ancient land, carrying hope wrapped in leather, and bound with the courage to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. Behind them, war approached. Ahead lay uncertainty, but they rode forward regardless, because some things were worth any risk. And justice, true justice, was one of them. They helped Swifthawk down into the cellar, the warrior moving with determination, despite the blood soaking through his shirt. Crawford handed him the satchel containing all the evidence, the journal, the letter, the sheriff's badge, everything they had fought so hard to obtain and protect. "The fort is 2 miles due east," Crawford said. "Tell the commander that federal authority is under attack, that territorial corruption reaches to the governor himself. Tell him Marshal Crawford requests immediate armed assistance." Swifthawk nodded, slinging the satchel across his body. He looked at Jacob, and something passed between them that needed no words. They had ridden together through danger, had become brothers in the truest sense. Now Swifthawk would run while Jacob fought, each trusting the other to do what honor demanded. "Tell Nalin." Jacob started, then stopped. What could he say that would matter? Finally, he settled on simple truth. "Tell her I kept my promise. Tell her the evidence will reach the right people. I will tell her you fought with courage," Swifthawk said, "and that you died thinking of her." He saw Jacob's expression and allowed himself a small smile. "But I will also bring help fast enough that you do not die at all." Then he was gone, disappearing into the narrow tunnel that led to uncertain freedom. Jacob climbed back up to find the siege intensifying. Carver's men had brought oil and torches. They meant to burn them out after all. "Here they come," Crawford warned, taking aim at a man carrying a torch. His shot was true, and the torch fell, setting fire to nothing but dirt. But there were more torch-bearers, approaching from multiple directions. The next hour dissolved into chaos. Flames licked at the building's walls. Smoke filled the office, forcing them to crouch low. Running Deer and Stone Fist fought with the calm efficiency of warriors who had accepted death but would not go quietly. The deputy surprised everyone by holding his position, despite the smoke and heat, his face set in grim determination. Jacob's ammunition ran out. He switched to his knife, knowing that when Carver's men finally breached the building, it would come to close combat. His shoulder throbbed, his lungs burned from smoke, but he felt strangely clear-headed. This was the moment everything had been building toward. This was where he would make his stand. Then, cutting through the roar of flames and gunfire, came a sound that made Jacob's heart leap. Bugles. The United States Cavalry, announced by brass and thunder, cavalry charging down the street with Swifthawk riding at their head. The effect was instantaneous. Carver's men, seeing uniformed soldiers with rifles and the authority of the federal government behind them, began to scatter. Some threw down weapons and raised hands. Others ran, only to be pursued and captured by mounted soldiers. Carver himself stood frozen in the middle of the street, his pearl-handled revolvers hanging at his sides, watching his enterprise crumble around him. When Crawford emerged from the burning building, badge gleaming, Carver finally seemed to understand that it was over. "Dutch Carver," Crawford announced, his voice carrying across the plaza, "you are under arrest for murder, theft, corruption, and conspiracy. You will be tried under federal law, and may God have mercy on your soul, because the courts will not." Carver's hand twitched toward his guns. Every soldier, every defender tensed. For a moment, it seemed he would go out in a blaze of violence, taking whoever he could with him. Then his shoulders slumped, and his hands moved away from his weapons. He was beaten, and he knew it. "The governor will protect me," Carver said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "The governor is being arrested as we speak," Crawford replied. "Federal marshals are already at the Capitol. Your entire corrupt network is being dismantled. You're going to die in prison, Carver. The only question is whether it takes weeks or years." As soldiers moved to bind Carver, Jacob sagged against the building, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Running Deer caught him, supported him, and for a moment they just stood there, Apache warrior and settler, having fought side by side, having survived against impossible odds. Swifthawk approached, moving slowly because of his wound, but with the fierce satisfaction of someone who had succeeded in an impossible mission. The fort commander, he understood immediately. He had suspected corruption but needed proof. "Now he has it. You saved us," Jacob said simply. "You ran fast enough to bring help before we burned." "I ran fast because I had precious cargo," Swifthawk replied. Evidence that will change everything? That will bring justice, not just for you, but for all who have suffered under this corruption." He paused. "And because my chief sister would never forgive me if I let you die." Despite everything, Jacob laughed. It hurt his smoke-damaged lungs, but it felt good. They had done it. Against odds that seemed insurmountable, they had succeeded. The evidence was safe, the corrupt officials were being arrested, and Carver's criminal enterprise was shattered. As the soldiers extinguished the fires and rounded up the last of Carver's men, the fort commander approached. He was a career officer, grey at the temples, with the bearing of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. "Mr. Stone?" he asked, and Jacob nodded. "I'm Colonel Harrison. Marshal Crawford has briefed me on the situation. What you've uncovered, the scope of this corruption, it's worse than anyone suspected. The Attorney General himself will be involved in the prosecutions. And the Apache?" Jacob asked. "Carver was planning to attack their village. We need to send word that he's been stopped, that they're safe." "Already done," Harrison said. "I've dispatched riders with messages explaining what happened and requesting a meeting with their elders. If what you've told us is true, if they helped expose this corruption, then the United States government owes them a debt of gratitude." Those words, spoken by a United States Army colonel, represented something Jacob had hardly dared hope for: official recognition of Apache assistance, acknowledgement that they had been allies rather than enemies. It was a beginning, small but significant, toward the kind of peace he and Nalin had dreamed of. The days that followed were a blur. Jacob gave testimony to military investigators, to federal marshals, to anyone who needed to understand the full scope of Carver's crimes. The leather journal proved even more valuable than he had hoped. Its meticulous documentation provided evidence for dozens of cases, implicated over 30 officials and outlaws, and established patterns of corruption that had lasted for years. The territorial governor was arrested, trying to flee to Mexico. His protests of innocence rang hollow against the evidence of his own signature on letters authorizing crimes. Other officials fell like dominoes: land office clerks, sheriffs, judges, all exposed and arrested. The entire corrupt system that had profited from conflict was dismantled piece by piece. Through it all, Jacob thought of Nalin. He wanted to ride for the Apache village immediately, to see her, to hold her, to share the victory they had won together. But his testimony was needed, and there was still danger. Some of Carver's associates remained at large, seeking revenge. Colonel Harrison insisted Jacob remain under military protection until the situation stabilized. It was Running Deer who finally brought word. He arrived on the 10th day after the battle, dusty from hard riding, but his face was split with a smile Jacob had never seen before. "The village is safe," Running Deer reported. "Carver's men never attacked. When word reached them that he had been captured, they scattered. Some fled the territory entirely." He clasped Jacob's shoulder. "You did it, brother. You kept your promise. You brought justice." "We all did it," Jacob corrected. "Apache and settler together. That's what made the difference." "Perhaps," Running Deer allowed. "But there is someone who wishes to hear this from your own mouth. Someone who has waited with more patience than I thought possible." His smile widened. "Nalin is coming here. She rides with Greyhawk and your friend Kuruk. They will arrive tomorrow to meet with the army and sign documents that officially recognize our assistance." Jacob felt his heart hammer in his chest. Tomorrow, after 3 weeks of separation, of wondering if he would ever see her again. Tomorrow she would be here. The thought made everything else fade to insignificance. That night, Jacob barely slept. He cleaned himself properly for the first time in weeks, borrowed fresh clothes from sympathetic soldiers, tried to make himself presentable. It felt foolish. Nalin had seen him at his absolute worst, covered in blood and dirt, half dead from hanging. But still, he wanted to look his best when they reunited. The Apache delegation arrived at mid-morning, announced by sentries, and welcomed with ceremony appropriate to honored allies. Greyhawk rode at the head, his weathered face showing satisfaction at seeing Jacob alive and whole. Behind him rode Kuruk, armed and alert but no longer hostile. And beside Kuruk, sitting her horse with quiet grace, was Nalin. Their eyes met across the fort's parade ground, and Jacob felt everything else disappear. The soldiers, the officials, the ceremonies, none of it mattered. Only her, only this moment of reunion after too long apart. He walked toward her, forgetting dignity or protocol. She dismounted and met him halfway, and then she was in his arms, and he was holding her like he had dreamed of doing for 3 endless weeks. She felt real and warm and alive, and he buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of sage and smoke and home. "You came back," she whispered. "You kept your promise." "I told you I would," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "Nothing could have stopped me." They pulled apart enough to look at each other, and Jacob saw tears on her cheeks, saw joy and relief and love written plainly in her expression. He touched her face gently, still hardly believing she was real, that they had both survived, that they stood here together. "It is finished?" Nalin asked. "The corruption, Carver, all of it?" "It is finished," Jacob confirmed. "Carver will hang. The governor will spend the rest of his life in prison. Everyone involved is being brought to justice, and more than that." He gestured to the fort, to Colonel Harrison approaching with documents. "The army wants to negotiate real peace with your people. Not the old treaties that got broken, but genuine cooperation based on respect." "My grandmother was right," Nalin said wonderingly. She saw this in her visions. Saw us standing between 2 worlds, building something new. Her expression suddenly tightened. "Grandmother." "Jacob, I know," he said gently, seeing the grief in her eyes. "Running Deer told me. I'm so sorry." Nalin's grandmother had died 3 days after the evacuation, peacefully in her sleep. She had lived long enough to know that Jacob had reached Santa Fe safely, that the evidence had been delivered. Her last words, according to Kuruk, had been about seeing her husband again and trusting that Nalin would finish the work they had started. "She died believing in what we built," Nalin said quietly, "believing that peace was possible. I will not let her faith be wasted." "Neither will I," Jacob promised. "We will build that peace together, you and I. We will create the world she dreamed of." As formal ceremonies began, Colonel Harrison presenting official recognition to Greyhawk, documents being signed that acknowledged Apache assistance and promised genuine cooperation, Jacob and Nalin stood together. Hands joined, watching the beginning of something new. It would not be easy. Generations of hatred and distrust could not be erased overnight. But this was a beginning, proof that different peoples could work together, that justice transcended tribal boundaries, that love could grow even in the harshest soil. Kuruk approached them, his face showing an emotion that might have been pride or might have been happiness. From him, the two looked surprisingly similar. "You have made my sister happy, Stone. That matters more than I expected it would." He extended his hand, and Jacob shook it firmly. "Welcome to our family. Try not to cause more trouble." "I will do my best," Jacob said with a smile, "though I cannot promise anything." As the sun climbed higher, painting everything in gold, Jacob felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt since before his first family died. Hope, not the fragile, desperate hope that fears its own extinction, but solid hope built on foundation of shared struggle and proved courage. He and Nalin had walked through fire and emerged together. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way, side by side, building their future one choice at a time. 6 months had passed since the day Dutch Carver was arrested in Santa Fe. 6 months of trials and testimonies, of corrupt officials facing justice, of a territorial government being rebuilt from its foundations. The newspapers had called it the greatest corruption scandal in frontier history. Jacob called it simply justice, long delayed but finally delivered. Now he stood on a hill overlooking the valley where his homestead had once stood alone. But it was no longer alone. Beside his rebuilt cabin, larger now with rooms for a family, stood other structures. An Apache dwelling in the traditional style, home to Kuruk and his new wife. A barn that served both communities. a meeting house where Apache elders and settler families gathered monthly to resolve disputes, share resources, and build the fragile bonds of cooperation. This was the settlement they had named Unity Springs, after the water source that had drawn Jacob here years ago and that now sustained both peoples. It was not perfect. Tensions flared sometimes, old prejudices died hard, and there were settlers and Apache alike who viewed the experiment with suspicion or outright hostility. But it existed, it grew, and it stood as living proof that another way was possible. Nalin approached from behind, her steps silent on the grass. Even now, after months of marriage, Jacob's heart still quickened when he saw her. She wore a dress that blended both traditions, Apache beadwork on settler fabric, creating something uniquely theirs. In her arms, she carried cloth and thread, working on what would become the wedding blanket for the ceremony scheduled for tomorrow. "You are thinking too hard again," she said, settling beside him. "I can see it in your shoulders, the way you hold them when your mind is far away." "Just remembering," Jacob replied, pulling her close, thinking about how different everything was 6 months ago. How impossible this would have seemed. "And yet here we are," Nalin said, leaning into his warmth. "Living in the impossible, making it ordinary. Below them, children played, Apache and settler kids together, teaching each other games, learning each other's languages, without the burden of hatred their parents had carried." Jacob watched a settler boy show an Apache girl how to throw a ball, watched her show him how to craft a snare. Simple moments, but revolutionary in their ordinariness. "Greyhawk sent word," Nalin said. "He and the council have approved the treaty terms Colonel Harrison proposed. Recognized boundaries, shared hunting grounds, joint councils for dispute resolution. It will be signed next month with representatives from Washington attending. Your people are sure?" Jacob asked. "Treaties have been broken before. This one is different," Nalin said with quiet confidence. "Because it was built with Apache input from the beginning. Because men like you and Kuruk insisted on terms that honored both sides. Because the corruption that profited from conflict has been exposed and punished. It will not solve everything, but it is honest. That matters." Jacob nodded, thinking of all the work that had gone into reaching this point. The endless meetings, the careful negotiations, the patient building of trust between communities that had every reason to remain enemies. It had been exhausting, frustrating, often seemingly impossible. But here they were. A rider approached from the direction of town. The actual town now, not the lawless collection of buildings it had been under Carver's shadow. Jacob recognized the man as Marshal Crawford, who had taken over as territorial marshal when the previous one had been arrested. Crawford rode up the hill and dismounted with a grim smile. "Stone, Mrs. Stone," he greeted them, tipping his hat to Nalin. The formal recognition of their marriage still surprised some settlers. But Crawford had been present at the ceremony that blended Apache and Christian traditions, had stood as witness and friend. "Thought you'd want to know. Carver was executed this morning. Hanged at dawn." Jacob felt no satisfaction at the news, only a kind of weary relief. "And the others?" "Governor got life in prison. Most of the officials who cooperated are serving reduced sentences. The ones who didn't," Crawford shrugged. "Justice is taking its course. Slowly, as it always does, but thoroughly." He paused. "There's something else. The Attorney General wants to meet with you both. There's talk of appointing you as official liaison between Apache communities and the territorial government, and Nalin as cultural advisor. Real positions, with authority and pay." Nalin and Jacob exchanged glances. They had talked about something like this, about formalizing the role they had naturally fallen into as bridge between worlds. But hearing it made official was different. "We would need to discuss it with the council," Nalin said carefully. "Such a position would speak for all Apache peoples. That requires blessing and authority beyond what I alone carry." "Understood," Crawford said. "Think about it. Let me know. The offer stands." He remounted his horse, then paused. "For what it's worth, what you two have built here, this settlement, this cooperation, it gives me hope. I've seen a lot of darkness in my years as marshal. It's good to see some light for a change." After Crawford left, Jacob and Nalin sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent. Tomorrow would bring another wedding. Swift Hawk, healed from his wounds, would marry a girl from a neighboring Apache band. The celebration would last 3 days, blending traditions, bringing communities together in joy rather than conflict. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "That day you found me hanging from the cottonwood, do you ever wish you had walked away?" Nalin turned to look at him fully, her dark eyes serious. "Every choice has a cost. Saving you cost me my simple life, my certainty about who was enemy and who was friend. It cost my grandmother her final days in peace, though she would say that peace without purpose is hollow. It cost me the approval of some in my tribe who still believe settlers and Apache cannot coexist." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "But it gave me you. It gave me purpose beyond simply surviving, beyond the endless cycle of revenge and grief. It gave me the chance to build something instead of merely enduring. It gave me hope that my children, our children, might grow up in a world less poisoned by hate." She smiled. "So no, I do not regret it. Not for a moment." Jacob raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you. I do not say it enough, but I love you with everything I am." "I know," Nalin said softly. "I have known since that day in the cave when you gave me your locket, trusting me with your past. I have known since you rode into danger to expose corruption that hurt my people as much as yours. I have known since you looked at me and saw not an Indian or a savage or an enemy, but simply Nalin, simply me." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, watching their settlement come alive with evening activity. Smoke rose from cooking fires, both kinds, Apache and settler styles, sitting side by side. Voices carried on the wind, calling children home, greeting neighbors, creating the ordinary sounds of community. This was what her grandmother had seen in her visions, Nalin thought. Not some grand gesture or dramatic moment, but this, the quiet building of a life together, the daily choice to see beyond hatred to the humanity beneath. The courage to believe that tomorrow could be different than yesterday. Jacob thought of his first family buried far away in Missouri. He thought of the grief that had driven him west, the emptiness that had consumed him. They would always be part of him, would always hold a sacred place in his heart. But they would want this for him, this new love, this new purpose, this new family he was building with Nalin. They would want him to be happy, to honor their memory by living fully rather than simply existing. "Come," Nalin said, standing and pulling him up with her. "We have a wedding to prepare for tomorrow, and you promised to help me finish this blanket. Swift Hawk will never forgive us if we present him with a half-finished gift." "He might forgive us," Jacob said with a smile. "He is patient." "He is Apache," Nalin corrected. "We remember slights for generations. Better to finish the blanket." They walked down the hill together, hand in hand, toward their home and the work that waited. Behind them, the sun completed its descent, and the first stars began to emerge. The cottonwood tree still stood in the canyon where Nalin had found Jacob, but it no longer represented death and despair. Now it was simply a tree, ancient and enduring, a witness to the territory's transformation. In the settlement, lanterns were lit against the gathering darkness. Inside their home, Jacob and Nalin worked side by side on the wedding blanket, their hands moving together in comfortable rhythm. They spoke of small things, tomorrow's preparations, news from neighboring settlements, plans for expanding the meeting house. The grand drama of their beginning had settled into the blessed ordinariness of shared life. And that, Jacob thought, as he watched his wife work by lamplight, was perhaps the greatest victory of all. Not the dramatic rescue or the exposure of corruption or even the peace treaty being signed next month. The real victory was this, the simple ability to live together, to build together, to face each day knowing that love had proven stronger than hate, that courage had overcome fear, that mercy had defeated revenge. Sometimes the hardest choice we face is whether to help someone we are supposed to hate. Sometimes mercy asks more courage than revenge ever could. Nalin had made that choice on a desperate day in the desert, and it had changed everything. Not just for Jacob, not just for their two peoples, but for everyone who would come after them and see what they had built. The wedding blanket took shape beneath their hands, woven with both their skills, blessed by both their traditions. Tomorrow they would present it to Swifthawk and his bride, would celebrate another union that crossed old boundaries, would take one more step toward the world Nalin's grandmother had envisioned. But tonight they had this: lamplight and quiet work, hands moving together, love grown from the harshest soil now blooming in the peaceful evening. Jacob looked at Nalin and saw his future. She looked at him and saw hers. And in that shared vision, that common dream, they found everything they needed. The night deepened, and Unity Springs settled into sleep. Settler and Apache, former enemies now neighbors, all resting under the same stars that had watched over this land for generations uncounted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to choose mercy over hatred. But tonight there was only peace, hard-won and precious, wrapped in a blanket woven by two peoples learning to become one community. And high in the mountains where the evacuation camp had been, where Nalin's grandmother had drawn her last breath, believing in impossible things, the wind carried whispers of approval. The old woman's dream lived on in her granddaughter and the man she had saved, in the children playing together without knowing they were supposed to be enemies, in the settlement growing where only division had existed before. Sometimes the hardest choice we face is whether to help someone we are supposed to hate, and sometimes that choice changes everything.